Hello everyone, welcome to yet another day in this Clown Decade, the decade where things are only going to get worse before they get better. And if you'd like to keep up with all things Clown Decade, please do subscribe to the channel and of course become a channel member. And my goodness, what a week to be a reform activist. It's been an absolutely sterling week so far to be a reform activist and be a plan truster with reform, and it's Tuesday. What am I talking about? Well, Reform recruited Danny Krueger, who is the first sitting MP they have recruited over from the Tory party. People have described it as crossing the floor. It's not crossing the floor because they're all on the opposition benches, but he has moved from the front bench of the opposition benches near to the back to become the fifth Reform MP, because if there's one thing Reform love doing, it's going between 4 and 5 MPs. And Madeline Grant is absolutely correct here to say that Danny Krueger is Reform's best recruit yet. When I saw the news, I was in a whole bunch of group chats and DMs celebrating this, because of all Tory MPs, Danny Krueger was probably one of my favourites to defect. And I was listening to quite a few podcasts, as I do, yesterday over on the Telegraph and the Times, and the general outcome of this when it comes to the chattering classes is nothing short of shock. Nobody knew about this, by the way. I had people DMing me saying, did you know anything about this? And no, I didn't. My councillor contacts didn't. Other people I know in Reform didn't. This was kept under wraps, and while I was listening to Tim Stanley on the Telegraph, he was saying how there were small hints that there could have been a defection. People thought it would be something small, an ex-MP, cabinet minister maybe again. No, this was Danny Krueger, and there were audible gasps in the room, apparently, when he was announced and walked in. And he was pretty devastating as well, but we'll get into his speech soon enough. For now, Ms Grant says, in fairness, I suspect plenty of Tory MPs are looking for reasons to get out of party conference this year. East Wiltshire MP Danny Krueger, who this afternoon appeared at the Farragina Elbow to defect to Reform, has probably found the single best if drastic get-out clause available. That was another thing. Tim Stanley was supposed to be at a dinner with Danny Krueger, or hosted by Danny Krueger, at the conference, and he asked him about that. That was his opening question, and Danny Krueger effectively said, oh, it's not me anymore, it's another less well-known MP. And Tim Stanley said, oh, well, I won't bother then. So yeah, very devastating. This Krueger was definitely one of the more popular Tory MPs. This is the watershed moment. This is going to turn into a waterfall of Tory MPs defecting. And, well, I've heard this from multiple sources now. 18 Tory MPs have been rejected so far by Reform. That's sitting, by the way. Bear in mind, at the moment, they have about 120, something like that. So that's over 10% of them that have, at the very least, shown an interest and been rejected. There's probably a few more that are accepted. They're just working on the timing for when they should come over. I think Esther McVeigh is seen as quite a likely defector, and she may be next. Krueger isn't the first MP to tread this path, of course, but because of his character and standing within the party he leaves, this defection isn't like the others. Nadine Dorries has probably fallen out with more people before breakfast than most of us manage in a lifetime. Andrea Jenkins seemed to have defected for the sole purpose of finding an audience for questionable singing talents. Harsh. I mean, to be fair, her singing of God Save the King was not very good. No offence to her. I've done shows where I've not sung very well. The sad decline of TV talent shows in this country is a lot to answer for, as the nation's deranged amdrag egotists are forced to turn to politics for their kicks. Andrea is a good politician, leave her alone. But Krueger is more than someone who wore a blue rosette for a bit. He is an intellectual Tory with ideas and positions which doesn't take to be fashionable or popular, but because he believes they are true, and because they resonate with political traditions going back 350 years, his defection will give pause to long-time Conservatives who might have viewed Reform as a wrecking vehicle. That Krueger thinks the cause for conservatism is best served not by the Conservative Party but by Reform is a major blow to his former party's intellectual credibility and possibly its survival. Yeah, I've been saying for quite a while it's over for the Tories, it's just a matter of time. And with Danny Krueger, a lot of people have come out and said, yeah, this is the first time I'm actually feeling that. I probably felt this not too long after Kemi Badenoch was elected, when I saw how useless she actually was. And actually, this is such bad timing for quite a lot of people. One, Danny Krueger was a big ally of Robert Jenrick and was his campaign manager. And obviously a few weeks ago you had the whole poltergeist takes over Zia's phone and likes an anti-Semitic tweet. Obviously Robert Jenrick and his social media manager have a massive go at Mr. Yusuf for being apparently anti-Semitic, despite the fact that he apologised for it and said it was a mistake from one of his interns. Probably was actually Zia Yusuf himself, but we'll by that. And now you've got Danny Kruger going over, who, well, is going to be working directly under Mr. Zia Yusuf, as Zia Yusuf is head of policy, and Danny Kruger's moved over to be head of the Department for Preparing for Government, which answers to the Department for Policy. So that's a bit of a stab in the back for Mr. Jenrick, who I can't imagine, who has probably tried to defect himself, to be quite frank with you, but has probably been rejected, frankly, because he was immigration minister overlooking one of the worst records on immigration ever. I still do not understand why so many people were Jenrick plan trusters, but there we go. And on top of that, Kemi Badenoch had pretty much her only good showing at PMQs, obviously putting the pressure about good old Lord Mandelson, giving his links to Epstein, and, well, give it less than a week and, well, one of her most intellectually talented MPs and a bulwark for small c conservatism has now left the party, saying it is no longer the principal opposition to the left, and has moved to Reform, indicating that they are the principal opposition to the left. And in fact, we may as well play that clip.
We've had a year of stasis and drift and the sham unity that comes from not doing anything bold or difficult or controversial. And the result is in the polls.
Yeah, Danny Kruger is not happy with the direction that the Tory party decided to go with Kemi Badenoch, which was effective. Which is really funny because people elected, I'm pretty sure the Tory party elected Kemi Badenoch because she did seem bold, strong-headed, like the Iron Lady Margaret Thatcher. And it turns out she's very lazy and is actually very much on the side of our policy should be let's review everything. At a time when, frankly, the country is fed up of that. They're quite clearly much more willing to hear answers that you're going to throw at the wall and see what sticks, rather than just say, we'll review and do everything via this massive bureaucracy, which, guess what, has caused all these problems in the first place. Kruger's right to defect. Well done.
And those lost voters aren't coming back. And every day, more and more people are joining them in deserting the party that has failed. And so this is my tragic conclusion. The Conservative Party is over.
I know an awful lot of Tories that felt a knife through their heart when they heard that. Hearing that from a literal sitting MP is, well, it's a death knell. It's one thing hearing it from ex-MPs, Nadine Dorries, Andrea Jenkins, etc. People who generally are seen as already quite maverick in their approach to politics and their place in the political party. When it comes to Danny Kruger, no, he is quite a central figure and was seen as effectively a bit of a hero for conservatism within the Conservative Party. He's now told you all, there's no chance here though. What do you do from there? Well, you leave. I'd say join Reform, but at the very least leave. What is there for you? You're basically in there as a right-wing Lib Dem.
Over as a national party. Over as the principal opposition to the left. But I'm not despondent, because conservatism is not over. It's never been needed more, and actually it's never been more vibrant. Because the failure of the Conservative Party has created space for an alternative.
Yes, quite so. The Tory party is over as any sort of serious vehicle for pushing, well, right-wing politics. That is now pretty much entirely within the Reform Party. You have 15 alternative right-wing parties, I believe that includes Reform, and there's only one that's a clear winner. And obviously you've got the Tory party that's effectively the Lib Dem party at this point, but they're thinking about leaving the ECHR. And in fact, yes, as we saw over last weekend, Tommy Robinson's rally had more people than he ever has had before. He usually gets 30 to 40,000. He had at least 3 times that over the weekend on the Saturday, with violence frankly being very much in the minority. Probably 200 people at most were involved in that. 200 out of at least 110,000. It's nothing. It's not even 1%. And as I went through in the Vox Pop yesterday, most people were there not even necessarily for Tommy Robinson, Elon Musk, or, God forbid, Katie Hopkins. They were there simply to show patriotism and show that they're fed up with the current government not doing anything about immigration. Plenty of people were there in favour of reform and Nigel Farage, despite the fact the whole thing was sponsored by Ben Habib's Advance Party. I don't think he got very many members from that because I don't think people were particularly aware that it was sponsored by him. I don't even think many people heard his speech. But we'll never know because he doesn't have a live ticker like Reform do. Anyway, responses to Kruger's defection are, well, they're not very good. Here's Kemi Badenoch.
We are the only party, the Conservatives, who are working on dealing with the government that we have now. We want them to live within our means. The economy is in free fall, they don't know what to do, and the Prime Minister is facing a political crisis. The only people who are drawing attention to that are the Conservative Party.
Sorry, but that's obviously just nonsense. Richard Tice is out every week going on about net stupid zero and the fact the economy's effectively flatline. The Tories have an advantage in that when it comes to PMQs or, well, any meeting in Parliament, debate in Parliament, they are His Majesty, official opposition. They get first dibs on responses, speeches and questions to the Prime Minister. Despite all that, the Daily News pretty much has reform, if not on the front page, certainly on the second page, whether it's about policy, defection or their conference. Sorry, but you need a better answer to he thinks that reform are the true opposition now than no, it's us, trust me bro.
Whether in exposing what the Deputy Prime Minister had been doing on her property taxes or with the American ambassador, both of them now gone. The fact is...
I mean, yes, you did take a couple of political scalps, which, let's be fair here, wasn't exactly the Tory party putting the work in to find those out. That one was a Telegraph expose and Mandelson, everyone already knew about that. And yes, you did push it in Parliament, but while you were doing that, what were Reform doing? Oh, here's our alternative. What's your alternative? Well, we're still waiting on that. Guess we'll find out at conference, but who cares about your conference at this point? At least the Labour one's going to have a deputy leadership debate and, well, I suppose vote as well, so at least that has some drama. But really, it's like watching a slow-motion car crash with the Tories, and I suppose that's entertaining to a degree, but it's just sad for a lot of people.
We are the ones who are making sure there is an effective opposition in Parliament to the government. At the same time you were doing that, Nigel Farage was in the US telling them that our country is like North Korea.
Well, I'm not being funny, but yeah, a lot of people feel like their speech is being infringed upon. It's quite funny, my parents still bring up the Chelsea Russell story, which happened back in like 2016 or something, where a girl in Liverpool posted some rap lyrics to Instagram because her friend died and it was her favourite song and she got arrested for it. And everyone's talking like Graham Linehan too. Like, my brother was even telling me about that and how it's bad, and honestly, my position on it is just, yeah, that's kind of normal. Oh, why were they armed guards? Because it's Heathrow. Why did it take 5 people? It always takes 5 people. They always send 5 people for it because it looks good on their quotas. That's 5 people who've made an arrest against someone who is going to pose absolutely no danger to them. He posed so little danger, he nearly had a stroke. And it kind of shows how unserious the Tory party are, but the reason that Kemi Badenoch has gone on that side of things of, oh, Nigel Farage went over to talk the country down is because effectively 14 years of Tory government oversaw these laws and oversaw this culture of diminishing our right to free speech. So of course she's saying that, oh, it's a bad thing that Nigel Farage went over to testify about the problem with free speech here. Because ultimately, it's a Tory record.
Well, right now, I am the leader of the party. The Conservative Party has been around for a very long time, but we cannot just assume that we're going to get support. We need to work for it. We only just lost and had a historic defeat last year. It's going to take time for us to rebuild trust with the public, but I'm confident that we will rebuild trust with the public. But that's by doing the job that we have to do now properly.
And that just shows the mentality. She thinks she's on the right track. She's not. Listen, you can take a scalp like Angela Rayner and Lord Mandelson, but ultimately no one cares. People don't really know about this. All people really know is that energy bills are going up yet again. They feel like they're being taxed into a lower standard of living. While they're being taxed more than ever, literally everything run by the government gets worse and worse. Nobody cares that Angela Rayner is no longer Deputy Prime Minister. Nobody cares Lord Mandelson is no longer the ambassador, apart from political junkies. Nobody cares. Honestly, I saw my family over the weekend, and sometimes big political news comes up. It was a hell of a week last week. You know, you had Mandelson going, you had Rayner going, you had Charlie Kirk being murdered. Did any of that come up? No, nobody cared. They felt like they had better things to talk about than taking scalps, and even the murder of a prominent American conservative. But to be fair, you know, I'm in Britain, nobody really knows about Charlie Kirk. My brother brought him up to me, of course, and my brother does talk about Angela Rayner, but my brother's more politically engaged than most other people. This week, being with family was more about escapism than it was talking about these political scalps that the Tories are taking the credit for taking, even though really, internally, it's Labour trying to get rid of Lord Mandelson, and when it came to Angela Rayner, it was just untenable, and that was more the right-wing media anyway, which I suppose does have connections to the Tory party. But it's just quite odd for Kemi to try and take credit for all this. She had one good PMQs about Mandelson, sure, but the media was not going to let go that he had connections, very, very close connections, with Jeffrey Epstein. Stein, whatever. Anyway, at least Kemi Badenoch didn't really make a comment about Danny Krueger, the man himself, because Tim Stanley posted, "I see some Tory activists are going down the I never liked Krueger route. Fools. The mood among the adults is shock and sadness. They've lost a man they should never lose, and more will now follow." And that's exactly what's going to happen. This is one of those moments where it started raining and it's now going to pour. And if Zia Yusuf is to be believed, it's, well, obviously already happening, and I would expect this to happen. Wow, phone blowing up, stampede off the sinking ship has begun. Lifeboats are very limited. And as I say, I've heard from multiple sources, including, I think the Telegraph mentioned this, 18 MPs from the Tory benches have been rejected. So they're not taking everyone. They're absolutely not taking everyone. What seems to be the criteria is you are only allowed to defect if you actually bring something useful. You're not allowed to defect if you are just trying to save your seat. What does Danny Krueger bring? Experience in government, as he was secretary to Boris Johnson. Campaign experience with Robert Jenrick, who outperformed himself, really, given he was a nobody a year ago. 2 years ago, I should say there, really. And obviously, it's a big, well, he's a big core of conservatism within the Conservative Party himself, so it does massive damage to the Tories that way. Whereas when it comes to someone like Robert Jenrick, why would we want you? You're going to be a bit of a stain on our record, given his work with not doing anything about immigration. Sorry, Jenrick Bros, it's true, he's just a bit useless. Anyway, this big defection has also dragged up some, well, blunders from Kemi Badenoch from the past. Here she is on the BBC being interviewed by Laura Kusenberg.
What I'm doing is turning the Conservative Party into the traditional, authentic conservatism that people recognise. And that's going to mean taking some tough decisions. I'm afraid if people don't like it, then they are welcome to leave.
They are welcome to go, so if they don't like it, then lump it.
And apparently there were Tory HQ staffers that were effectively saying quite openly, well, she's getting what she asked for. And in fact, freelance journalist Aaron Newbury posted this in response to this clip. Earlier this year, Kemi informed staff at Central Office that those who didn't want to be there should leave, as reported by Guido Fawkes. Staff who I am told work tirelessly, 12 to 14 hours a day, 6 days a week. Oh, I couldn't do that. Well, I couldn't do that again, I should say. Behind the scenes for multiple elections. She came in, accused staff of laziness and disloyalty, which is incredible from Kemi Badenoch to blame anyone else for laziness, and then had her CEO, now a peer, force dozens of staff out. Kemi has formed for this sort of my way or the highway style. The only minor issue she faces when trying this with the British public is that the highway is more tempting. Yes, Kemi Badenoch becoming leader of the Tory party has effectively killed it. I never thought she would be that bad. And there's a lot of people saying that Robert Jenrick would be better. Robert Jenrick would be better. I don't necessarily think you'd have Danny Krueger... Well, you definitely wouldn't have Danny Krueger moving over, actually, given he was the campaign manager for Robert Jenrick. But I still think you'd be seeing the odd defection, because I think really this has been a route that the Tories have been going down ever since they forced Liz Truss out. I think that was pretty much when everyone kind of agreed she'd die, that she, as in the Tory party, died. Which is quite ironic, because I joined them just after that thinking, oh God, I need to join them and make right-wing politics work. And then obviously they just crashed and burned, so I joined Reform instead. And, well, I have never been happier or more hopeful about the future. Which is quite something to say from someone who has basically lived through a financial crisis and lived through a world that has not even tried to recover from it. Anyway, with the Tory party tearing apart at the seams is pretty much usual these days. When it comes to the Labour Party, however, they are currently imploding under their own incompetence. As Michael Simmons of The Spectator writes, Rachel Reeves is the destroyer of jobs. So over the past year, some 142,000 payroll jobs have been lost, according to the latest labour market figure from the ONS. And they're probably overstating it. Another 8,000 disappeared last month alone. Unemployment remained at 4.7%, higher than a year ago. The bulk of the job losses come in accommodation and food service, which shed 90,000 workers, because in a recession, the first thing that people stop spending money on is holidays and restaurants. The culprit seems obvious, the anti-business tax raid unleashed by the Chancellor in the last budget, and my God, the budget in November is going to be even worse, and there's a little graph for you. Tories, post-COVID, they had a bit of a peak, obviously, because COVID meant a load of job losses. Economy recovers a bit, but really you're seeing a relatively stable figure of, I don't know, maybe 70,000 jobs made a year or something like that, and that was going down over time because, well, the Tories were okay on the economy, whereas Labour seemed to be actually actively awful with the economy, and that job loss is only going to get worse. The £25 billion hike on employee national insurance, as well as the increase in the minimum wage, is not just discouraging job creation, but making employers think twice about keeping people on. And with the government's employment rights bill sailing through Parliament, businesses fear that the things can only get worse before they get better. We don't just have to take the word of the ONS, whose statistics have been deeply flawed over the past few years. There is a host of private surveys pointing the same problem. The firm Manpower found last week that Britain had by far the biggest reduction in hiring plans over the last year. Global average was a 2% point reduction, and the next worst country, Singapore, saw a fall of 9%. For Britain, it was 17%. Oof. Bank of England too, who rely more on their own survey due to lack of faith in the ONS, released data recently showing that in response to the national insurance increase, over a third of firms said they'd raise prices in response. Meanwhile, nearly half said they'd cut jobs, and 20% said they'd lower wages than they otherwise would have done. And every video, I say this every time I make on the economy, I always get comments saying, yeah, either I've had a problem with my job, I've been let go, or I've not had a raise like I thought I would, or they know a lot of people who are in the same boat. When looking at the minimum increase, some 29% said jobs had been lost as a result. For Rachel Reeves to argue she has not raised tax on working people is now simply incredible. Well, she doesn't know economics, so what do you expect? On top of all that, the UK economy failed to grow in July following the biggest contraction in manufacturing output for a year. The ONS, again, which typically overstate these things and have to revise them down, said the economy saw zero growth in the month, which was in line with expectations following a 4% expansion in June. Monthly figures are volatile, and the ONS has said it will now focus on growth over a rolling 3-month period, and in the 3 months to July, the economy expanded 0.2%. Yay! That's still dire. That is still worse than your average Tory 3-month rolling average. It's horrendous. She just has to go. Rachel Reeves has to go. You cannot be in the job for a year and tank the economy like this and expect to stay. Same with the Prime Minister, by the way, but I don't think he's going anywhere. Because this would be okay. You can get away with having low growth if there is an expectation that it will grow again. Because this happened with Margaret Thatcher when she got in. She did cause a bit of a recession. But in the long term, we ended up with real growth for an entire decade. Well, 2 decades, really. Whereas we've got Keir Starmer in, and they're saying, no, we expect it to grow by the end of 5 years. But nobody else does. That's just Labour, once again, pig-headedly not addressing the facts in the room with them. And they can't do anything about it because they have a mad backbench that doesn't understand that you actually have to pay for all this via taxation. Anyway, I feel like I cover the economy enough, really. Saying it's awful and it's Rachel Reeves' fault can only be said on this channel so many times before I want to, well, just stop covering politics altogether. Anyway, that wasn't the only issue, though, that was a problem for Labour this week, and was an absolute godsend for reform, and, well, to some extent the Tories, I suppose, because Peter Mandelson scandal, obviously the latest was with the whole Epstein thing, and now you have the long history of Peter Mandelson's scandals, and he is a scandal machine. It's still amazing to anyone how he even got to the job of US ambassador, and he's been kicked out just a few days before Donald Trump is coming over. So who's the new ambassador? Don't know, but they'll have to be introduced here. So his first scandal involved purchasing 2 houses, one of which was a 2-bedroom ground floor flat in Bloomsbury for under $200,000 at the time. But he also purchased a, well, nearly £500,000 Victorian terrace house in Notting Hill. And when this journalist tried to inquire as to how he got that, none of the neighbours even knew that Mr. Mandelson was there. And so he had to ask Mandelson himself, what are you doing in Notting Hill and how do you afford it? To which, obviously, Mr. Mandelson was very obfuscative and, well, just got incredibly irritated and said, I want to talk to your editor. Anyway, 2 years later, the story surfaced again when it was revealed that Mandelson had made the purchase thanks to a private interest-free loan of £373,000 from fellow Labour MP Geoffrey Robinson, a businessman with a wide range of interests who at the time was reputedly worth £30 million. Blair's landslide in May 97 meant that by then Robinson was Paymaster General and Mandelson, who had indeed topped Robinson's money up with a building society loan, was Trade and Industry Secretary. The fact that Mandelson's department was at the time investigating Robinson's business dealings added to a smell of sleaze, and both were forced to resign. Mandelson, who had failed to declare the loan in the Registry of Members' Interest, protested that he had deliberately avoided taking part in any departmental decisions related to Robinson. Oh, like that's going to be enough. Remember Tory sleaze? Remember when that was a big story? Yeah, part of the reason the Tories thought they could get away with it was because of things like this, but if Mandelson can't get away with it, I don't know why the Tories thought they could. Anyway, that was just the earliest of all of Mandelson's scandals, and he still managed to return to Parliament twice after, as a minister, I should add. Anyway, in the midst of all this, there are words that Andy Burnham, current Mayor of Greater Manchester, is on manoeuvres to get into number 10. He is a ridiculously popular mayor and has been doing pretty much everything you'd expect of a Labour mayor in Manchester. He, to be fair to him, has, well, I've not actually experienced it since, but he has apparently improved the public transport network immensely by nationalising the buses, plus the tram network was pretty much always good. Though he did try to put his own version of ULEZ in Greater Manchester, which was effectively another way to have 15-minute neighbourhoods where you'd have to pay per carbon emission zone that you went through, which effectively was bordered by each borough, I believe. Anyway, it's been under review for about 5 years now and it's still not actually implemented, and hopefully it never will be. Anyway, Andy Burnham isn't an MP, so how can he possibly become leader of the Labour Party and therefore PM? Anyway, why is everyone suddenly talking about his prospects? Well, Angela Rayner's cabinet departure has increased speculation over Starmer's future, partly because of the questions it has raised about his judgment alongside the disastrous handling of the Mandelson scandal. But it has also opened up space for Burnham if he can find a way back into Parliament, because the two of them occupied the same soft left lane of the party. The fuzzily defined territory occupied by those who were unconvinced by Corbyn but had turned off by Starmer's attempt to compete with reform, and the Tories on immigration and welfare, it suddenly becomes much more realistic with her as the picture. Pippa said, who I believe is The Guardian's political editor, she was the most obvious successor and she is on the soft left of the party, but that's Burnham's constituency now, and to be frank, his time as Mayor of Greater Manchester really has been largely scandalous and, well, somewhat successful. When I sometimes reflexively say I don't like him, mainly because he's on the soft left of Labour, and I'm asked why, I can't really give specifics, and I'm quite honest about that. So I suppose it's time to actually do research on him, but that's not for this video. So what's in his way to become MP? Only one really, but it's absolutely massive. And to run for leadership, you have to first become an MP. Again, Burnham was actually an MP and was Minister for Health at one point, I believe, under Blair. Starmer's Chief of Staff Morgan McSweeney has exercised an iron grip over the party selection process through his allies in the party's NEC. If the leader's position looked more secure and Burnham had the leisure to wait for a seat to come up organically, it might be politically impossible to deny him one, but as it is, Burnham will probably have to admit that he is running with an eye on leadership. He also needs the cooperation of friendly Manchester MP ready to give up their seat and career before Christmas, if he doesn't want to risk the bandwagon rolling on in unpredictable ways, or even Starmer's resignation coming before he's even in a place to run for leadership. There are a couple of MPs who might stand down, perhaps in return for a future peerage, Pippa said, which include Graham Stringer and Andrew Gwynn, who was suspended last year over offensive WhatsApp messages, have both been mentioned. But it would still be incredibly difficult even with the vast majority of local party members behind Burnham. McSweeney's control of the NEC means that he can be blocked. Burnham can say that this is a denial of democracy, but McSweeney is likely not to care, because McSweeney is actually possibly the most intelligent person in Labour, which makes him quite dangerous, but luckily he's got absolute morons around him who can't actually do anything properly and keep blocking what McSweeney wants to do, such as cut the, winter fuel payments, along with disability claims. If he is to get nominated, some of the seats that might be options may also appear a lot less safe than they once did, with Reform doing well in Manchester and Farage beating his chest about the possibility of exacting a humiliating defeat. Yes, I'm actually crossing my fingers that Burnham pulls through with these manoeuvres, as I will literally travel to Manchester as much as I can to campaign against Burnham getting a seat and for Reform to win. That would be incredible. So finally, can this obstacle be overcome? Well, if Burnham can't beat Reform in Manchester, you might argue there's not much point in him becoming leader anyway. He is such a big name in Manchester, and there's a huge amount of personal affection even among people disaffected with Labour. That's definitely true, by the way. It's going to be a hell of a battle to try and beat Burnham, but it's probably possible. So I think he can overcome that threat if he gets in the right seat. McSweeney's blocking ability could still be terminal to the prospects, but if the embattled Chief of Staff's departure turns out to be the price of Starmer's survival, it's not all clear what would happen to the faction he controls on the NEC, and if the body's members conclude that the tide is going out on Starmer, his ability to control them might dissipate anyway. Oh God, it's all complete chaos in Labour. The funny thing is that this all seems rather realistic, which is even funnier. As long as he's there and empowered, it's very difficult for Burnham, but if that changes or the NEC reaches the point of disillusionment with Starmer that some MPs are at, then all bets are off. We're not far away from that, by the way, so actually, realistic prospect that there's another by-election that Reform really need to push. And hell, even losing that by a couple of thousand votes is probably still really good going, which is what I said about Runcorn, of course, and we won by 6 votes, which was massive for Reform's momentum. Anyway, if you thought that's bad, here's what the political editor Alex Wickham of Bloomsburg had to report about Keir Starmer's enemies in Labour, who are actively campaigning to destabilise him. However, there is a lack of a credible successor that appears to keep him in power for now. Literally, Labour are so useless and so lacking in talent, they literally have no one to replace the complete lack of talent they have at the top of their party. MPs loyal to the PM say they don't see a realistic chance of him falling, despite the widespread dissatisfaction and lurid headlines, mainly because there's no plausible replacement. His critics should put up or shut up. Well, not being funny, that's what Kemi Badenoch was saying, and that's not gone well. Chris Curtis has said, all this back and forth about who has the top job risks repeating the navel-gazing that led to Tories into a spiral of endless chaos, fingers crossed. Many MPs who spoke to Bloomberg think talk of replacing Starmer is premature, but they also said the left, and remarkably, a lot of the soft left is seriously trying to take him out. The problem for the plotters is the lack of viable replacements. Who are the viable replacements then? Let's take a look. So Andy Burnham, obviously. They don't see an easy route for him to Westminster, however, and Rayner and Gwynne seem unlikely to step aside anyway. Would he even beat Reform in a by-election? There's a lot of scepticism about that from MPs, so the next safe option is Wes Streeting, one of the few who could even remotely claim some sort of mandate, but his tiny majority means he'd need to chicken run, and he'd face a rough ride with the members. With Angela Rayner, who was the main rival, she's now badly wounded because of the whole tax thing, which again, I don't even think was that bad. Louise Haigh, a surprise suggestion by MPs, given she is also scandal hit and way of Prime Minister material. Louise Haig's was worse than Rayner's, by the way. She was committing fraud, basically, to try and get the latest mobile phones from work in a trade union. Ed Miliband, he's already been rejected by the public, but you never know with Labour, they might try again. Lisa Nandy was once the rising star but's fallen away. Shabana Mahmood or Richard Phillipson are still unproven at a senior level, however, both are in senior positions in the cabinet. A Starmer ally says changing leader would mean Farage could rightly say they have no mandate and it would hand him the next election on a plate. Still, the PM supporters accept he needs to improve quickly. Better personal engagement with MPs is seen as important, plus potential policy offerings such as a 2-child benefit and Northern Powerhouse Rail. Starmer has time but needs to get better, another backer says. Budget is seen as pivotal. It'll be gone next year. The dream and the classic two-party system is falling apart as we speak. It's been incredible to watch this slow-motion car crash, and I can't wait for Reform to do well when it comes to the election. And honestly, that's probably going to be the easy part for them. They need to then actually govern well. Do I have faith they will govern well? I certainly have more faith than the two parties that we have had for the past, well, century. They could screw it up, and then yes, we are in a very dark period of our history, but it's kind of not even really worth thinking about. It's going to be so chaotic and something that absolutely nobody can actually predict what specifics will happen. It's barely worth thinking about. I'd rather work towards actually winning and getting a government that is at least 80% on my side of things. That would be nice to have for once in my lifetime. Anyway, I'm going to be enjoying these slow motion car crashes of the two major parties as they hopefully slip into irrelevance over the end of the decade. And with that, I think I will leave it there. Right. If you enjoy what I do, do subscribe, leave a like, leave a comment. Great ways to help me out, along with becoming a channel member and leaving super chats and super thanks. I will be streaming tonight with Tosh News, and there will be Laughing at the Guardian on Saturday. There will not, unfortunately, be a gaming stream on Thursday, as Jeg is not about, so that was it for Hollow Knight, I'm afraid. I will be back in October with the gaming stream to play some Life is Strange. And videos, of course, out as and when I can make them. Right, with that, that is everything I had for you for today. So once again, thank you very much for watching, and until next time, goodbye.